But wait, when I mentioned to have Chloe around me at every single moment, I experienced some sort of hardcore déjà vu, which reminded me of the situation when I woke up, looked at the clock, and saw the empty bed of Chloe, who was gone for some time. And well, that connection of circumstances let emerge another important question inside me. Why was she here? It was 11:20 more or less, exactly the time she had to attend her usual treatment she never really talked much about. And that happened every day without exception. So the fact that this exception occurred right on the day I left made me assume some deeper meaning. It felt as if she made it for me without mentioning anything though. I would have loved to ask her about that, but my parents were already inside and waiting for me. Regarding that, I didn't want to stir up questions about things which were unpleasant to talk about. I never was a friend of talking about those relationships, be it with family or friends. I don't know, but I just felt like a loser, which probably explained that feeling that got over me when someone mentioned the term love, girlfriend, or relationship. It seems more than strange, but it really triggered that shame inside me to be retarded on that area. So I remained silent and treated Chloe more or less like a stranger. Ultimately, I hoped she understood me, as she had done so often before. Although it was an ice-cold goodbye, I kept on following my parents through the door while I carried my bag. I took a last look at Chloe, whose gaze was fixated on me basically all the time. My heart wanted to call out for her a last time, but my eyes, and with them my brain, saw my parents in front of me, who would certainly notice my action. So I stayed calm and left with a silent waving motion. And corresponding to that, I felt everything but happy. Now primarily not even because I had to leave her, but instead because I didn't honor what she taught me. The lesson to appreciate life more than before, to let love into my life, disregarding what others thought about it, was completely forgotten at that moment. But I remembered then another lesson to prop the first one. I shouldn't let life live for me. Rather, I should live life. Which means taking responsibility for what I want, and first and foremost, doing what feels right, and not what does primarily for others. With that in mind, I saw myself in charge, and my mind was rattling for solutions. Some better, some worse. I was so occupied that I paradoxically even forgot to walk and just stood there while my parents almost reached the exit of the ward. When I noticed that, they were already staring at me, calling out my name and asking what I was doing. I think I forgot something. Give me 1 minute, please, I explained. One part was annoyed, the other confused. I was aware of that, but I just had something else on my mind. As I told my parents, I had to search for something I forgot. As I told myself, I had to set things right with something I already found. So I almost stumbled back into my former residence to catch up with my intention. She was still sitting there on her bed and staring at me as if I had been a ghost. But without further hesitation, I lifted the mood by saying, "Well, I forgot something very important." She started to smile a bit as a consequence, while I walked over to my bed, which was totally out of context for her, as I noticed from the corner of my eye. I acted as if I was searching for something, emphasis on acting. I mumbled typical phrases to myself, like, "Where is it? Where did I leave it?" Only to turn around later on, to just say right into her face, "Oh, I found it." I approached and stretched out my hand to initiate a proper goodbye. When we grabbed onto each other's hand, I recalled that last question I had wondered about and formulated. "Just answer me real quick. What happened to your treatment?" She stared at me and smiled. Sometimes you have to procrastinate things to make space for something more important. At that time I knew exactly what she meant, or rather whom she meant, and that made me grab her hand even harder. But with my parents in my mind, I came to the actual point very quickly. I just wanted to say goodbye, and that we will see again very soon, I promise. Then I stroked over her hand once more and walked away from her. But I didn't come far, because she interrupted. "Haven't you forgotten something?" I looked around. But except for a restored bed and the corresponding bedside table, which was also tidied up, I noticed nothing, so I frowned at her about what she meant. Consecutively, she stretched out her arms in a more exaggerated way compared to me before. I just gave in and approached once more to hold her hand. Before I could even notice, she had raised herself onto her knees and pushed her lips against my cheek. She had done it so fast I couldn't even react, so I just stood there and let it rain over me. A silent whisper followed then. "So that you don't forget me." I swear, I was the most happy, lucky guy in the world, and the best. I didn't need to tell anyone, so I avoided any ever so annoying questions. Besides, that was actually the departure I secretly craved for deep down. So warming, so soft, so spectacular. And as a consequence, the following goodbye was by far not that difficult, because we both knew we would see again. We claimed that many times already, but that was truly the first time both of us believed that. So I slowly disentangled my hand from hers, and receded slowly, while walking backwards so that I could see her. I waved a last time and left the room, this time with the certainty to have rectified everything that needed to be rectified. I grabbed my bag, which was still standing more or less in the middle of the hallway, and walked further into the direction of my parents, who had taken a seat next to the exit. Mom asked bored whether I had found what I was looking for. I nodded happily and indicated towards the door to say that we could leave now. Indeed, I had achieved anything I wanted for that day, so there was not really one spark weighing me down. While Dad left first, and then Mom, who pushed the door open for me, I saw someone standing in the middle of the ward gazing at me in the manner of a stalker. A serious gaze from the stalker's side, but also a faint wave. From my side I reciprocated and made a gesture as if I was about to launch out for a 30-meter wide hug. Then I closed the door to the ward with the intention to not let my parents wait again. Whatever occurred next, I looked forward to it. I was beyond happy, even when it meant to pass the time with books as my new best friends. But at least on the first day, I had a lot of variety. When we arrived 30 minutes later at home, I primarily had to acclimatize myself to my room. Although it was the exact same room I passed years in, it felt absolutely strange. My PC, my bed, were just like I left them, the Saturday on which it happened. How much time has passed since then? 1 year? 2? Yes, my feeling for time was totally off. Maybe the one and only long-term damage I had to carry with me. However, the rest of that day I passed the time with watching a couple of videos and talking with my parents about different things, like my parents' residence and the exams. So to say, a little bit past as well as future. The second day was marked by initially first approaches to catch up with preparation, and further by a brilliant idea that dealt not too much with school. To explain, the 3 days after my release, I was excused from school because of an arrangement made by basically everyone involved. The doctors who were responsible for my state, the school itself, my parents, and of course I spoke out for that little free space due to the fact of lack of routine. They brought forth that no one was able to accustom that quickly to something new or even to something old when there was an interruption like that. And it didn't matter how long somebody had been abstinent from their normal day-to-day life. After all, the thought of change from 1 to 100 within seconds is utopic, and that ought to have been the main occasion. So even though I had no compulsory tasks yet, I planned on working at least a little bit, starting with English, which consisted basically of extending my vocabulary and improving specific structures or grammar. For biology, I had to refresh my knowledge referring to genetics, evolution, neurobiology, enzymes, and so on. Those fields were very huge indeed, but once you had a clue of all that, it was quite obvious how it works. Additionally, I had to learn, of course, the anatomical structures involved, as a contrast to the practical facts. Yeah, I might have sugarcoated that subject a little bit, but inside my sleeve was my mojo. Wait. I had it indirectly, but at least it was in my mind. So I didn't think further about the potential issues of biology. Instead, I dealt with premonitions about what could be important for computer science. Latter, namely, was my nemesis, so to say. When I spoke about theory and practice in terms of biology, I stood in front of the same challenge in the subject informatics. English was close to 100% practical. Either you could write and answer their questions or not. That's it. But in biology, we kind of had a division. The ones who were not good at reproducing could focus on the tasks to apply that knowledge, and vice versa. I was one who stood rather in between. I was neither an expert in reproducing nor applying either. So I intended on preparing myself in both ways, as if I wanted the 15 points. 15 points were the highest score you could reach and required to have solved 95% of all tasks correctly. That was equal in any subject, but in every subject equally hard to achieve. I didn't say that I expected to gain the 15, but I wanted to prepare myself like I did, primarily to put my conscience to rest. After all, I couldn't do something else than making my way through all those texts and worksheets we composed throughout the year 11 to 13. So back to the computers, because there we had kind of predicament. Not only the students, but also our teacher. Let me explain. It was another field divided in theory and practice. On one hand, we had the knowledge, like the architecture of computers, processors, memory, electric circuits, communication between networks, and so on. That even worked in many cases so far, but the problem was situated elsewhere. Informatics implies also writing lines of source code and other instructions for the artificial intelligence. Something like, if this is fulfilled, do that. If not, go back to the last step. And that happens within one loop until it has reached its purpose. Believe it or not, I always had immense trouble with that. Those instructions, or rather structures, didn't make any sense for me. I just couldn't follow when we made exercises in this regard. But as it turned out, many others couldn't either. So it was not a problem of one apparently retarded student, but rather a problem for the teacher. Because when only 10 or 20% were able to solve your tasks, then you have to consider remedies. After all, it's the course of the teacher, and therefore he's kind of responsible for that. We already tried so many different things, like relocating the proportions of theory and practice, insert more theory even, and well, we had then at least a middle segment with acceptable but not all too good grades. So we could have agreed on handling it like that in our abitur exams, but in the end it was not that easy. The teacher does not determine solely which tasks are brought to paper at last. He only conveys a prototype exam to a higher body or commission as a proposal. In the end, the decision laid solely in the hands of those. And when they ordered to paste more practice, then, well, we had the same result again in the most important exam so far. Correspondingly, it was a common apprehension all of us participants had. I mean, when you had the second worst grade in a normal test, it was fine more or less. It happens, but not as a result of the abitur grade, which determined greater parts of our ongoing lives. If it was too bad, then you were unlikely to become employed in certain professions. And that was everything important. So after countless meetings and attempts, we concluded with the arrangement, according to which he composed an exam following the proportions 80% theory, 20% practice, in hope they would accept it. And well, as far as I knew they had, so we had at least a little bit calmness before the storm.